Have you ever noticed how many laws we have in the United States? We have laws from our federal government, our state governments, and our local governments. How do we know who's in charge? The United States government is based on federalism. Federalism is a method of government that allows two or more entities to share control over the same geographic region. Each person in the United States is subject to the laws of that city, county, state, and our federal government. In a federalist government, the power is divided between the national government and other governmental units. In the U.S., this means the power is divided between our federal government and our state and local governments. This is different from a unitary government, where one unit holds the power. It's also different from a confederation, which is an association of independent governmental units. The Articles of Confederation originally established the United States as a confederation, where each of the states operated separately and independently from one another. The United States Constitution sets up our current federal government and replaced the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution recognizes the federal government as the highest governmental power, though it also acknowledges that the American people are subject to several different powers. After almost a decade operating under the Articles of Confederation, the framers of our Constitution realized that the states had too much power. They felt they needed a different system. They wished to create a stronger federal government. The result was a balance of powers between the states and the federal government, with the federal government clearly in charge. This is the system of federalism we still use today. The Constitution expressly grants broad powers to the federal government, but not to the states. Instead, the Constitution stresses what the states can't do. The addition of the Bill of Rights, including the 10th Amendment, helped temper some of this imbalance. The 10th Amendment gave the states all powers not delegated to the national government or denied to the states. In other words, under federalism, the states get to regulate whatever is left over. For example, Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress certain powers, such as coining money and declaring war. The following section prohibits the states from such things as coining money and declaring war. The Supremacy Clause is an important part of federalism. This clause is the section of the Constitution stating that the Constitution and federal laws are the supreme law of the land. The framers recognized the weak federal government established by the Articles of Confederation and wanted to ensure the states wouldn't ever overpower the federal government again. The Supremacy Clause is a guarantee that no laws will interfere with the goals of the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause is found in Article 6, Section 2, where the Constitution specifies which powers the federal government has and which powers the federal government does not have. When a state law conflicts with a federal law, the Supremacy Clause operates to invalidate the state law in favor of the federal one, as long as the federal law is found to be in pursuance of the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause also means that states can't regulate, interfere with, or control federal issues. This principle comes from the famous 1819 Supreme Court case of McCulloch versus Maryland. Here, the court held that Maryland could not constitutionally tax the operations of the Bank of the United States, since that was a federal power. It may seem as though the Supremacy Clause and 10th Amendment work together to draw a clear line between state and federal powers. However, sometimes a state and the federal government will battle for power in a certain area. Through the Supremacy Clause and concepts of federalism, we know that federal law trumps state law. However, we don't always know whether or not a state has a duty to enforce federal laws. The United States Supreme Court settles these disputes. The Supreme Court is the highest federal court in the U.S. and is responsible for interpreting constitutional powers. One example is the 2000 Supreme Court case of Reno versus Condon, where United States Attorney General Janet Reno sued South Carolina Attorney General Charlie Condon. Reno wanted South Carolina to enforce the Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1994, which set certain federal regulations on driver information. These regulations prevented states from disclosing a driver's personal information without the driver's consent. South Carolina laws allowed the state to sell this information. Condon refused to enforce the act, arguing that the 10th Amendment reserved the regulation of drivers to the states. Condon argued that the act violated principles of federalism, since the regulation of drivers is not mentioned in the Constitution. The Supreme Court, however, sided with the federal government. The court said that Congress could regulate this area because Congress is responsible for regulating interstate commerce, and driver information was an article of interstate commerce. Let's review. Federalism is a method of government that allows two or more entities to share control over the same geographic region. In the U.S., this means that the federal government, state governments, and local entities share powers over the citizens. Our constitutional framers recognized that the Articles of Confederation made the states too strong and the federal government too weak. They purposely created a federalist government through the United States Constitution. The Constitution's Supremacy Clause tells us that federal laws will usually supersede any state laws or local ordinances. The Supremacy Clause ensures that the Constitution is the highest or supreme law. The 10th Amendment gives some power back to the states, though only those powers that were not already granted to the federal government.